here. I'm Jenny Peterson. I'm president of the Riley County Genealogical Society, and it's nice to have an afternoon where we have a wonderful speaker lined up to talk to us. A couple of things I want to mention is that while she's talking to us about Cora Kimble, she also wrote an article in our Kansas Kin that came out last November. So if you still have your Kansas Kin from November around, you can also check that out. It's online as well, so if anybody, or we have copies at the library too. But Danielle has been an active member writing, and now she's going to be speaking to us today. So anxious to hear what she has to say. She tells me she's a native of Topeka, went to Washburn, and then got another degree in Emporia, and worked in Independence, Missouri for a while before coming back here to K-State, where she's now the University Records Manager at K-State. As she says, she's an archivist with a passion for ancient history, so committed to preserving institutional memory. She discovered Cora Kimble in her diary while working in the Morse Department of Archives and Special Collections at K-State's Hale Library, which is a fantastic resource for all sorts of things local here. So I'm anxious to hear what she has to tell us about Cora Kimble's diaries, and we'll be visiting with her after she's done to ask questions and to find out more. So, Danielle?
It's the very bottom there. Oh. There we go, I think. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Danielle Hall. Like it was mentioned, I am the University Records Manager, but also an assistant professor at Kansas State University in the Archives and Special Collections. My research since getting this job has focused on local history, as we can tell today, archival materials, and then I really like to look at the ways that everyday people, particularly women, fit into the broader historical narrative of our society. So today, I want to introduce you to a woman whose life might appear at first glance fairly ordinary, Cora Kimble. She wasn't a national figure. She didn't lead a political movement or publish widely, but what makes her remarkable and what makes her so valuable for historians is that she left behind something incredibly rare, her own voice. Specifically, she left behind a diary from 1881, and that diary became the foundation for two articles that I've written. The first one was A Window into 19th Century Domestic Life, the 1881 Diary of Cora Kimble for the Kansas History Journal. This focused on the domestic life in 19th century America, and then the second one, as was mentioned, was the Kimble family in Manhattan, Kansas, Civic Legacy and Private Lives for the Riley County Genealogical Society's journal, Kansas Kin. So if you have that, you can check that out. This one examined the Kimble's role in the development of Manhattan, Kansas. But today, rather than focusing on the Kimbles as a whole, I want to do something a little different and focus just on Cora and her story. It's not one that most people hear very often. I'm not going to lie, when I was researching, sometimes it was hard to get some resources. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to her story. So why does Cora Kimble matter? Why are you here today? Why did I do my research on her? This is an important question because traditionally, history hasn't always made space for women like her. When we think about women's history, we often think about activists, reformers, suffrage leaders, women who stepped into public roles and challenged the system directly. And those women are absolutely important. I don't want to diminish anything that they do. But they were not the majority of women. Most women in the 19th century lived lives centered around the home, caring for families, managing households, maintaining social relationships, and carrying emotional burdens that were rarely acknowledged. Cora Kimble represents some of those women. Her importance lies not in exception, but in representation. And I do also want to note that Cora was a middle to upper class white woman and does not represent women as a whole in the 19th century. There is still a big gap there. So just kind of wanted to give you that disclaimer. What makes her story so powerful, though, is that her diary gives us access to something we almost never get in the historical record, her interior life. We see not just what she did, but how she felt. We see her loneliness. We see her happiness, her anxiety, her desire for approval, her grief, and then ultimately her resilience. That allows us to rethink what counts as historical significance. Because if we only focus on public achievements, we miss the emotional and domestic labor that made society function. Cora's life reminds us that history doesn't only happen in legislatures or battlefields. It also happens in kitchens, in bedrooms, in quiet moments at the end of the day. And those moments matter. So as we go through today, there will be time for questions at the very end. I've made sure of that. To guide us through her story, I've structured this presentation as somewhat of a narrative journey. We'll begin with situating Cora within her historical environment, looking at Manhattan as a growing Midwestern town shaped by strong social expectations and close community visibility. From there, we will explore her upbringing, her marriage, both of which placed her within prominent families and subjected her to significant social pressure. These early experiences help us understand the expectations she carried into adulthood and ultimately into her writing in her diary. At the center of this presentation is Cora's diary. Through it, we gain insight into her daily life, domestic responsibilities, and emotional struggles. That's a really big one with it. Particularly, attention is given to the turning point created by her miscarriage in 1881, a loss that profoundly altered her emotional world and did have a strain to her marriage. Her writing reveals grief, silence, and then the expectation shaped not only in her personal life, but the experiences of many women during this period. From there, the presentation moves beyond the diary, because the diary is only a year, moves beyond the diary to examine her later civic involvement, her family relationships, and her lasting impact on the Manhattan, Kansas community. These later chapters show how her private experiences connected to a larger public life. Underlying all of this is one central idea, though, that private experience is not separate from history, it is history. Traditional historical narratives often focus on political events, economic developments, and public figures, leaving little room for the emotional and domestic experiences that shaped everyday life. Cora Kimble's diary challenges this by showing that history also unfolds, like I said, in kitchens, bedrooms, and in quiet moments. So we're going to move on to her early years before she married. Oh, I'm going to get one quick drink. Understanding Cora Kimble's life requires placing her in late 19th century Manhattan, Kansas, a town transitioning from frontier settlement to structured community with growing institutions and social hierarchies. Prominent families like the Ulrichs, sorry, I always mess up her family's name, and Kimbles helped shape this development, while economic growth created a visible upper middle class that defined local standards of respectability, especially for women, who were expected to uphold family morality and social stability. Manhattan's civic culture emphasized community involvement, with men participating through public office and business, and women contributing through social accepted roles, such as church work, education, and cultural activities. Although less formally recorded, women's labor was essential and visible. Cora's later work in the cemetery, and we'll get to that at the very end, management and horticultural societies reflects how women could exert influence within these boundaries, while her diary shows how expectations were learned, reinforced, and privately negotiated. Reputation and daily interactions mattered, encouraging careful attention to behavior, household management, and emotional self-regulation. Cora's writing reveals how women internalized responsibility, not only for their families, but for maintaining social harmony. In this way, Manhattan is not just the backdrop, but an active force shaping Cora's experiences and the broader realities of women's lives. And this photo was borrowed from the Kansas Historical Society. So, her background, how did she grow up? Who was her family before she got married? Cora LaFond Ulrich was born in 1862 into a family that occupied a position at social prominence. Her father, Robert, was a successful builder and brick manufacturer, someone whose work literally helped shape the physical landscape of Manhattan today. And this is their home at 121 North 8th Street. She grew up in a household that had both influence and visibility. And that meant she was raised with very specific expectations. From a young age, girls in families like hers were trained for a particular future: marriage, domestic responsibility, social refinement. They were not widely encouraged to pursue independence in the way that we think about it today. Instead, they were taught to succeed within a defined role. And what's especially important is that these expectations weren't just external, they became internal. When we read her diary in a few slides, we will see that very clearly. We see her measuring her own worth based on how well she fulfills those expectations that were put on her. We see her blaming herself for things that, from, I think, our modern day perspective, are not failures at all. So her upbringing doesn't just shape her opportunities, it shapes how she thinks about herself as she goes through these turmoils. So, Cora Ulrich married Judge Samuel Kimble Jr. when she was just 18 years old, stepping into adulthood through a marriage that on the surface looked very successful. It brought together two well-known families in the community. Her husband was older, already established, and highly respected, especially in legal and civic life. This was also his second marriage. His first wife, Hannah, had died during childbirth. So he came into the relationship with experience and expectations already shaped, where she came in brightly new. From the outside, this seemed like the ideal match. But for Cora, the reality was probably much more complicated. Her marriage marked a sudden and dramatic shift in her life. Almost overnight, she moved from being a daughter in her parents' home to a wife responsible for running her own household. There wasn't really a transition period or time to adjust. She was expected to manage the home, host visitors. Trust me, she had a lot of visitors. Support her husband's public role, and present herself as a model wife, all at a very young age. I know personally, when I was 18, I could not do that. I was going to my mom to help schedule my doctor appointment. So, a little different. When we turn to her diary in the next few slides, we start to see a different side of this experience. She writes about feeling isolated at times, unsure of herself, and worried about whether she was doing things right. Those concerns weren't unusual, especially given her age and the fact that her husband had so much more life experience. But they do give us a glimpse into what that transition actually felt like on a day-to-day level. So we're going to jump into her diary. This is probably going to take up most of our time. In 1881, Sam gave Cora a small leather-bound journal as a gift, and she began writing what would become her diary. It's only 78 pages long. Not every page is filled out. Not every day is filled out, as it only covers the first year of her marriage. But it's incredibly powerful. Today, it's preserved at Kansas State University in the Morse Department of Archives and Special Collections, allowing us to hear her voice more than a century later. In this diary, Cora wrote about her daily life, her household chores, social visits, her marriage, if it was windy out, if there was a lot of rain. She kind of wrote about everything, as well as her private thoughts and emotions. That was something that hit you almost at every page. And I'll also have a disclaimer. It took me about a year to read and transcribe this with the help of Sarah K. Kearns over there. It is very emotional. And one thing in archives is when you are working on an emotional project, you have to take breaks because you take on their emotions. So that is why it took me so long. Let me see. Public records can tell us what people did, but diaries show us how people felt. Through her writing, we see the rhythms of everyday life in the 19th century, the work that went into running a home, the expectations placed on women, and how closely those responsibilities were tied to their identity and self-worth. But we also see something deeper. Cora writes openly about loneliness, anxiety, and uncertainty, feelings that women were not always encouraged to express. Her diary reveals a thoughtful, observant, and emotionally complex person who was actively trying to make sense of her life, this new world that she had no experience in. Because of this, her diary helps us understand history in a more personal way. It reminds us that the past is not just made up of major events, but of everyday experiences, emotions, and quiet moments that might otherwise be lost. A large part of Cora's diary focuses on everyday work, like I said, cooking, cleaning, sewing, organizing, hosting. Cora had to remember tasks, anticipate needs, and maintain a household that reflected well on her family. In a small community that visibility mattered, there was pressure to keep everything running smoothly and to meet social expectations and familial expectations. Over time, throughout the diary, we can see how closely this work became tied to her sense of self. When things are going well, she felt successful, her entries were happier, they were cleaner to read, honestly. When they didn't, she often saw it as a personal failure rather than the result of how much was being asked of her. We can also see this. Her writing was very squished together, was longer. A lot of these longer entries are ones that I still am having trouble translating today because there was just so much emotion. Her diary helps us recognize that this wasn't just housework. It was essential labor that kept families and communities functioning. And although it rarely appeared in official records, it played a central role in everyday life. So here are a few of her initial entries. I did translate it. If you see a question mark on any of the translations, it's because myself, Sarah, and a few other people are not sure what that word is. These initial entries showed us the fondness and love Cora had for Sam. It also highlights a few of the domestic duties that Cora had. I think one of my favorite entries is the middle one, February 4th, where it says, "Tomorrow he will be home again. How glad I will be. How glad I will be. We'll have a nice supper for home and make homecoming pleasant." A letter says, "Have a chicken for me." I just loved it because he's like, "Hey, I'm coming home. I really want a chicken. Please have it ready when I walk through that door." Those are the entries I love the most. But these are the entries I also love reading because they're so happy and they're kind of just easier to get through. Now we're going to transition from happy to a very dark time in our life, and I do want to give a disclaimer. We are talking about miscarriage. I'm not going into the medical dealings of it, but there will be some emotional entries. At the center of Cora's diary, though, is a profound moment of loss, her miscarriage in March of 1881 to her son. This is a turning point, not just in her writing, but also in her emotional life. Pregnancy loss in the 19th century was actually very common, but it was something people rarely talked about. There were no open conversations, no real space to grieve publicly, and very little support. They were considered taboo topics. Cora's diary gives us a rare and deeply personal glimpse into what that experience was really like. She writes about the physical pain, but also the heartbreak, the sense of loss, longing, and loneliness that followed. And what stands out most is how alone she seems to feel throughout all of this. She carries this grief quietly because that's what was expected of her. There was a strong social expectation that women remain composed and continue caring for others even in the middle of their own. In her writing, we get a sense of that struggle. She tries not to burden her husband, not to say too much, not to let her grief show too openly, not to tell him she's having a bad day. But in her diary, she lets it all out. And that's what makes her words so powerful. This is one of the only places where she can be completely honest about what she's going through and how she's feeling. Her writing reminds us that this kind of loss didn't just pass quickly. It stayed with women for their entirety of their lives. It affected how they saw themselves, their bodies and their lives moving forward. Cora may not have been able to speak about her grief openly at the time, but writing it down, she made sure it wasn't completely lost. Today, these words help us better understand not just her experience, but the quiet and often unseen pain that many women carried during this time. So here's that initial diary entry of the loss of their son. I will say there was one entry before March 11th where you kind of get an idea that something is happening, and I didn't include it because she starts saying she feels sick. She's having headaches. They call for the doctor. And so you start to get kind of a sense of something's not quite right. Her grief was palpable as she wrote through the pain of not being able to see her child's face even once. Both Cora and her husband were heartbroken. And Cora's physical suffering was evident in the description of the physical pain she endured. She starts the entry off similar to a birthing announcement in a newspaper. Since she suffered a miscarriage, though, there has been no known documentation of this pregnancy as, like I said, it was considered a taboo topic. In fact, since I began researching Cora in 2024, I have tried to find where her baby might have been buried because in a later entry, she does indicate that they created some type of burial space for it. But because there was no formal record, I have yet to be able to locate it. There's a few places I'm still trying to search for it because I'm kind of on a mission at this point, but this is the only known documentation we have that her firstborn son did not make it to birth. Following her miscarriage, Cora's diary reveals a period of deep grief marked by silence and isolation. She frequently wrote about crying alone and feeling unable to share that depth of her sorrow with her husband. This emotional distance reflects broader cultural norms that discourage open discussion of grief, particularly related to pregnancy loss. This is also when we begin to see the cracks in their marriage that unfortunately do not go away. They show throughout the rest of the diary. And then this is just one of the entries that I picked. I think it shows that what she was feeling and how alone she felt compared to maybe not being able to lean on her husband. The strain on her marriage becomes increasingly evident in her entries. Cora worried that her husband no longer loved her, questioned her worth, and feared she had failed as a wife. Remember, she at this point at most is 19 years old, if even that. At the same time, she resolved to suppress her pain and remain cheerful for his sake. This dynamic illustrates the unequal emotional burden placed on women to maintain that marital harmony, even in the midst of personal trauma. Cora's diary captures the complexity of marriage during this period, when ideals of companionship coexisted with rigid gender roles. Women were expected to embody the ideals of piety, purity, and self-sacrifice, while dedicating themselves to the care of the home and the moral upbringing of the children. Men, by contrast, were positioned as providers and decision makers while operating in the public sphere and maintaining authority within the household. So we can't say for certain that Sam wasn't also feeling this loss. One, because it's from Cora's point of view, but two, it was more ingrained in men to keep it silent that they were the providers. They did not show the emotion. So you have this struggle and this battle happening between the two. They're not coming together. Her writing allows us to see how grief would magnify existing tensions and how limited emotional communication left women to bear the suffering largely alone. I will make the case, men also bearing that alone too. They were completely separate. These insights deepen our understanding of both marriage and mental health in the 19th century. Now, this is, I think, probably one of the harder entries I had to read because she really does get into her emotions and get deep on herself. So, despite these challenges, her later life revealed a different dimension of her experience. Because remember, this is only a year long. One thing I will note is when she was given the diary by her husband, he said, write whatever you want in it. She wrote whatever she wanted in it. And then in one of the later entries, he had found the diary, learned what she had written, and was not happy. And that is promptly where the diary stopped. There was not more after that. So that's why, this part was short. It was short once he found the diary in December. She wrote in it maybe once saying that her husband was mad at her still. So that's why it kind of cuts off abruptly. So we're kind of moving past the diary now. Despite these challenges, her later life reveals a different dimension of her experience. One of Cora Kimble's most remarkable roles was serving as superintendent of Sunset Cemetery, a paid position that was quite rare for women at the time. In this role, she earned a small salary of $25 a quarter and took on real responsibility, overseeing maintenance, managing plantings, and helping shape the appearance of an important public space. This work required organization, leadership, and care, especially since the cemetery was a place tied closely to the community memory and mourning. While it fit within socially acceptable rules for women, it also gave Cora a meaningful degree of authority. She had something outside of the family that she could also focus on. Through this work, Cora left a visible and lasting impact on Manhattan's landscape. If you're from Manhattan in here, I'm sure you have heard of Sunset Cemetery. It's not that far away from here. It showed how women could influence their communities in ways that were both practical and deeply significant. Cora also played a key role in promoting Arbor Day in Manhattan, earning the title Mother of Arbor Day. This is actually one thing that kind of got me interested in Cora, because I was like, how can she be the Mother of Arbor Day? It existed before her, I need to know more. And by then it was just kind of like a rabbit hole I kept falling into. She organized tree planting efforts, encouraged community involvement, and even included her children in caring for public spaces. This was a form of quiet leadership, rooted in care, stewardship, and long-term impact. While it fit within acceptable roles for women, it still required the initiative and organization. Through this work, Cora helped shape the community in lasting ways, showing how women could make meaningful contributions even without holding formal positions of power. And these were not the only two things that she did in the community. She was a part of societies. However, Cora, a lot of what I know from her is from her diary and like newspaper.com. Outside of that, it was pretty hard to find anything about her except her name or Mrs. Sam Kimble. And even in the newspapers, it was Mrs. Sam Kimble, which it was so frustrating going through because I had to look through like thousands of newspapers. But there was more she would have done. I just don't have that evidence to back it up. Although Cora Kimble's diary focused heavily on the domestic life, her later years reveal a woman increasingly involved in public and civic. So, although she had a miscarriage, Cora and Sam went on to raise 3 sons who lived to adulthood. Although her diary never mentions her children because it was only for that year, newspaper accounts and community recollections show a close-knit family. Her sons, Samuel Robert, or Robbie as they called him, Kenneth Kenny, or Kenneth but Kenny, they're the ones in this far, my way, left, right picture. So I guess you're left, yeah. And then her youngest son, James Carlisle, they called him Lyle, they often assisted her with community work, particularly at Sunset Cemetery. And Lyle is the one in the solo photo. He had his moment, he loved it. However, the boys did not always keep their noses clean. They did not always listen to their mother. This one I found really funny. One particular lively story published in the Manhattan Mercury on May 21st, 1899, recounts a horseback ride shared by Cora and Kenneth that turned into an impromptu coyote chase. The article describes how they startled a prairie wolf west of town, pursued it to its den, and with the help of a crowbar, unearthed 3 coyotes. They triumphantly returned to Castle Kimble, which is the house that Sam built while he was married to Cora. It is also not far, it's right by Sunset Cemetery. They returned to the castle with their captives, as they called them, proudly showing them off to visitors. Now, I don't fully know what that means. I don't know if they tried to keep them as pets or what happened, but that is what was reported. The scene is extremely humorous and telling, a mother and son spirited and fearless, sharing a moment of excitement that became part of now Manhattan's lore. Another time was when Robbie Kimble ran away with a friend to New York because they decided that they wanted to be Marines. I think it was about a week-long endeavor where Sam Kimble and a few of his associates had to go to New York, get the boys, because they were caught. They didn't get away with it. But by the time he was reunited to his parents, he decided, the Marines are no longer for me. So essentially he took a joyride on a train to a different state. I don't know about you, but my mom would kill me. As we move toward the conclusion, like I said, I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions. We can begin to see how all of these elements, the despair, the happiness that her 3 adult children brought her, the new marriage to maybe an older man, the growing up as a middle to upper class white child. We begin to see how all of these elements come together. So, although Cora Kimble's diary focuses heavily on domestic life and loss, her later years past the diary show a woman who became increasingly involved in public and civic work. She passed away on August 23rd, 1912, at just 50 years old. She had a long illness, believed to be some type of cancer. I've heard a mix of stomach cancer, I think tongue cancer, some type of cancer is what they believed. During that battle, she endured multiple surgeries where she went to K-State and even out of the state, or not K-State, sorry. She went to Kansas City and then out of the state, which was something especially difficult given the limits of medical care at the time. She couldn't just jump in a car and be there in an hour. It took a while. What stands out through all of this is her endurance and the strength through it all. Through her diary, we see a woman who was thoughtful, observant, and emotionally complex. And I say woman, we see a young woman. 18 years old, could still be considered a child. Someone who experienced deep grief, worked constantly, and kept going despite the challenges she was faced. And just in that year diary, she faced a lot of challenges. Her story reminds us that these so-called ordinary lives are anything but ordinary. It also highlights the importance of preservation. Without her diary, we might only know her as the judge's wife, as Mrs. Sam Kimble, or a name in local history. Hey, did you hear about that woman Cora? No, tell me about her. Well, that's all I know is her name, Cora. Because her words were saved, she is still able to speak to us today. And that's really the takeaway from today is history lives close to home. It exists in diaries, family papers, and local archives. And sometimes it also exists in your attics. So you might have someone go look in your attic every now and then if you can. Cora's story reminds us how important it is to preserve those voices because they help us better understand the past in a more personal and meaningful way. They help give the entire picture, not just one portion of it. And that private experience is not separate from history. It is history. Thank you. I don't know. There were still prearranged marriages at that time, but there's no indication that it was, so I can't say for sure. But also, you say prearranged. They were two very prominent families. It could have just happened.
Other questions?
Hi. I was wondering. Okay, I was looking at you like, you look a lot like Cheryl. Yeah.
Did you find out in that diary or anything else if she had other female friends?
She did. So and that one's one thing I didn't mention. I do mention it in one of my papers, is her friends really did rally around her, because I say, well, they didn't talk about it. That was her support system. I can't say if they talked about it, but yeah, she had friends, her mother-in-law, her mother, visiting almost daily during this process. It was hard to decipher what the friends' names were, just because of her writing. It's not the best. So I do have some where I've matched them up with newspapers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but if you're interested in a name, let me know, and I can probably look it up. But yeah, she had quite a few friends visiting her and sisters.
Was she in the domestic science book? I was asking that question. Well, I'm not going to ask that question. You're going to be home and look.
Yeah, let me know. Yeah, I have like a list of names, so just let me know, and I can try and figure out if it matches.
Yeah, Domestic Science Club was an early women's group here, and Linda's the historian for that, so that's why I said it. Marcy. Did her husband remarry?
Not after her, nope. She died. He remained single, focused on his work, and died here in Manhattan, Kansas. Yep, never remarried after her.
Sherry.
Was she involved in church activities, and what clubs was she involved in?
So I didn't see much about church activities. I did see that she was part of the Horticultural Society. That was something her and her husband were both very involved in. She was also involved in women's suffrage. And I actually just discovered this not long ago, which is why it wasn't in here. But she did lead a meeting on women's suffrage. So those are the two that are highlighted the most. I wouldn't be surprised if she was involved in her church. It's just I can't find any connections with it.
Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned it multiple times, and just seeing her writing up there, I can understand how it was difficult to translate. So, was that primarily, was that a result of just her kind of writing however she wanted?
Mm-hmm.
Was her handwriting just naturally difficult to read?
Mm-hmm.
Why was her writing so disjointed and difficult to read?
So I think part of it had to do with what they taught me in school. Once I hit 6th grade, we stopped learning cursive, which is extremely difficult when you work in the archives. There were words that I could put together pretty easily that matched up, but then there were words that either we as a society don't use anymore, they mean something else. And then this one, as you can see, this isn't even the worst. There are a few sentences where they're so pushed together, they're almost overlapping with each other. Also, she had a limited education. Her spelling wasn't great. So that was also an issue. I do, for everyone, have a translation document with every entry. It keeps trying to tell me that I need to autocorrect some things because of the words. I'm not, as a historian, I'm not going to change her writing. It's going to be as it is. But those were the biggest ones, is the spelling, the differences in meanings compared to today. Once I got the hang of it, kind of learning, okay, this is what her M's look like, it was easier. Like I said, Sarah Kearns, I had her help me quite heavily on this translation. She teaches the class in historical translation, correct? Iffy, yeah. But yeah, it was a variety of things. Some of the words were so smushed together that you could make out one letter. I think one of them was the word purple. Reading the sentence, that makes no sense for that word, purple. So we still don't know what it is. I don't want to say it's purple unless I'm 100% confident on it. So that was the biggest issue, is kind of all over the place.
Judy?
I have my grandmother's diaries,
Mhm.
but they are written in German.
Oh.
K-State.
I know I can't personally. That might be something, if you go on the library's page, we might have some resources. I don't think so. Modern languages?
Modern languages might be able
And it
to.
depends on how old the journal
Yeah.
is.
Marcy?
I'm reading more of how AI
Mm-hmm.
can read historic writing and all. Do we have access to something like that?
No, and I will say I did not use AI to translate or read any of her diaries. When it comes to historical context and text, it is extremely difficult because every single person writes it in a different way. Some people write their M's differently, some people write their N's differently. There are universities that are trying to create systems to read it, but when it translates, the work you're having to do at the end of it, you kind of have to gauge, is it worth the time? So here at K-State, as of right now, when it comes to historical text, we don't have any system that can read it. I think it's something that in the next few years we might see happen, but because text is so personal to the person writing it, it would be very hard to do it. We also have to take into account copyright and intellectual property at K-State, so there's just a few things up in the air that right now we don't have available.
Yeah, I was wondering, does she have any descendants living in Manhattan today?
She does, and one of her descendants is here with us. If somewhat, yeah, she does. There are descendants of the Kimble family. I have not met them all. I think Charlene is the closest one I've met.
The Kimble last name, but we've got Johnson,
Yeah.
we've got Russells, we've got Goff family, Parker family, so there's a lot of
Mhm.
descendants, not from the judge. His 3 boys moved away, but the other family have a lot of members that I haven't even met.
And I have a personal
Yep.
anecdote to go with that. Cora obviously never had a daughter, and
Yep.
she regretted that. And her brother Joseph, second wife, who happened to be my half first cousin once removed, bore him a daughter, and Cora convinced them to change the name they'd given her from, what did I say, Lucy Pearl to Cora LaFond. So that young woman went through life as Cora LaFond Kimble and married into the Parker family. So they have descendants here in town.
Which was very confusing when it came to research. Because I saw a Cora LaFond and I was like, that's not possible. She's in her 50s, but this says she's celebrating her 18th birthday.
It was confusing to me as a genealogist for that family.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out why this strange name got changed. I mean, one name got changed to a stranger name, in my opinion, but now I know.
Yeah.
So. Any other questions? Linda again?
This is one. I wanted to know how old Sam was when he got married.
Oh, Sam, at the top of my head, he was in his 20s. It was late 20s. I believe it was either 26 or 29. So it was late 20s. His first wife, they weren't married quite 2 years before she passed away. I don't have it at the top of my head right now. And that's the thing is with the research, I really focused on her. I tried not to focus on too much on Sam.
Yes, what clues do you have for where you think the baby was buried, in case anybody in the room might be able to
Yes.
further on that path?
So when they first got married, they lived on points, and she, in one of her entries, has it to where she went across to the cemetery under a tree at the front of the cemetery to visit the babe. I've looked in Sunset. I've looked on any of the unknown. I don't know if it's the Sunset Cemetery. I've heard rumors that there were other cemeteries. I haven't looked in closer to points. But those are pretty much the clues that I have. I think I went through 4 or 5 hours at Sunset Cemetery one day. I looked online, printed off all of the known Kimble, even the unknown babes, and searched. I can't find it. I do think it's interesting that at their headstone it has Sam, Cora, and Anna, his first wife, but then it also has the baby, Anna, that was lost when Anna gave or died giving birth. So I think that's interesting. It's somewhere in a cemetery close to a tree at the front of the cemetery. Either sunset or points. I know. That's kind of the issue. Sunset's really the biggest one I've looked at, but I'm hoping once things kind of lighten up, I can go and scour a few more smaller cemeteries, because at this point, I've spent so much time at it, I'm determined.
Since he was upset about the diary saying whatever it said, how did it survive?
So all I know is she had put in one of the entries that said, what did she call him? She called him Hubby. Hubby found the diary, upset about the entries and the words that she wrote. Past that, she doesn't say what she did with it. An ancestor donated it to us. I believe they found it in one of their attics. So I don't know if she hid it. I don't know if they put it in a drawer and never found it until that drawer was put in an attic or something. Yeah. I wish they would have told me more. We do have a diary of his from about 10 years later, at least 10 years later, that I kind of want to dive into next, and that might give me more context clues. I just haven't had the time to read it quite yet. But yeah, once he found it, the writing pretty much stopped, and then until it was donated to our collection at Bay State. And it's in great condition, I will say. It is online. You can, if you go to our website, go into our digital archives, we do have it digitized, so you can find it there. If you want a link, you can let me know, but I mean, it's in wonderful condition.
Sunset Cemetery has burial records back to 1879.
Yes.
Nothing there?
No, and that's what I did look at. I went as far back as I could. There are unknown Kimbles, Jane Doe Kimbles, baby Kimbles, but nothing, one that matched up with that March time frame. Or if it was one of those, there's just no indication. It didn't match up with maybe what was written in the diary, which the grave could have moved, but there's just no indication.
I have this book,
Mm-hmm.
and Sam died in 1924 at 70.
At 70.
So, he was born in 1854.
Mm-hmm.
So, 1880.
He's 12 years old, yeah. Yep. Awesome.
What is the book on?
Neighbors.
Neighbors.
Other questions?
Did Cora have any association with the university?
Cora did have some, I didn't dive too much into that, mainly because I wanted to focus on the diary. She did have association with the university. She took classes at the university. I believe it was in, the word is escaping me, but yeah, she took classes at the university. I did see a few records of that. And then so did Sam as well.
Wasn't he at least taught?
Yes, he taught there. Yep, the Judge taught at the university. So there was a family connection. She took classes, he taught, so they were involved in the university. And we have more records on him. Like I said, I kind of had to be picky, or otherwise I was going to still be researching on it. I think his diary is probably going to be my next one, so I'll see what I can find too.
Glenna, did you have a question?
Oh, it's that Ulrich house, that's
Yes.
still there.
Yes, it is.
12108, that's still there, except that.
Yeah, and that's a more modern photo, obviously. But yes, it was still there. It is still there. Multiple houses that her father built are still standing today. This is just the one that I could find the photo of.
And aren't there Ulrich buildings?
Yes. Yep, there are. Yep.
Do you have any idea if that brick was made locally?
Yes, I believe the work that he did, let me see. He got his bricks locally, so it should have all been pretty local.
Marcy, did you have a question?
Did all of his sons stay in Manhattan?
No.
What careers did they enter?
They did not stay in Manhattan. None of them stayed in the Manhattan. They branched out. One, I believe you said, went to California, New York. Yeah, almost every different way. I don't know what their careers were. It's not something I researched too much into, but they didn't. None of them stayed in Manhattan. So she has extended descendants, but not immediate here in Manhattan.
Other questions? Charlene?
Her father had the brick company here?
Yes. Yeah, her father had a brick company in town, and that's why I know that they were local, because I did read an article on that. He was very well known. Like I said, a lot of his buildings are still standing, some named after him. Like,
I recall a tour down at City Park,
mhm.
someone mentioned it, big large depression, southeast corner.
Oh, okay.
Was excavated for clay.
Oh, okay.
That's the way I recall it.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Brick-making in Kansas is definitely something that happened in that era. So that's great to know. Other questions, anyone? Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
One of the things that the Genealogy Society and the Historical Museum put out, golly, 5-6 years ago, was a coloring book on famous women in the Manhattan area, and one of them focuses on Cora Ulrich Kimble. So if you have the coloring book or you want to get one, you can download it off the website still, particularly at the museum site. Ours is currently not on the front page anymore, but we'll put it back up. But yeah, Cora was one of the people that was focused in that, and I will just give you a promo that we're about to come out with a second coloring book, which will be out in the next couple months, I guess. It's at the printer, I think. So we're getting close to one, and that will focus on the trail markers around Manhattan, the same historical events that are documented in our trail markers.
And the coloring books and pages are fun to actually color. I've colored her a few times when I needed a break, so I would check it out.
Coloring in the Past, it's called. So anyway, okay, next month our changing topics. We're going to be riding trails and writing rhymes, cowboy culture of Kansas with, oh come on, where's the name pop out here? Ron Wilson. So that should be a fun segue into a different topic slightly, but he's always entertaining, and I hope you'll all come back. That's going to be on June 28th here in the library again at 2:30, so hopefully we will see you then. And in the meantime, thank you again for coming out today. We really appreciate having you all here.